The gunshot shattered the morning silence, and Caleb Harlan knew his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Blood stained the porch steps where he'd once carried his dying wife. Now he stood between a loaded rifle and the quiet woman who'd walked into his life 3 months ago, the woman his daughter called Mama, the woman he'd been fool enough to send away. The man holding that gun had come to reclaim what he believed was his, but Caleb had already made his choice. Some things are worth dying for. Some people are worth becoming someone different. Before we begin this journey across the windswept prairie where broken hearts learn to beat again, I invite you to stay with us until the very end. Drop a like, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The Kansas wind had a way of cutting through a man, stripping away everything soft until only bone and resolve remained. Caleb Harlan had learned this truth the hard way, standing over fresh-turned earth 3 years ago, watching them lower Sarah into ground too hard, too cold, too final. Now he stood at that same grave in the fading light of an October evening, hat in his weathered hand, saying words he'd said 1,000 times before. "I'm doing my best, Sarah. God knows I'm trying. But Maggie," his voice cracked like old leather, "Maggie needs more than I know how to give." The prairie grass whispered around the simple wooden cross he'd carved himself, back when his hands still shook every time he picked up a tool, back when Maggie would wake screaming in the night and he'd hold her while they both wept for the woman who'd never come back. 3 years. 3 years of cooking meals that tasted like ash. 3 years of braiding hair wrong, of missed buttons and inside-out dresses. 3 years of watching his daughter's smile fade until she barely spoke at all, just watched him with those solemn brown eyes, Sarah's eyes, that seemed to ask why he couldn't be enough. The ranch stretched around them, 200 acres of stubborn survival. The barn needed new boards, the fence line sagged in a dozen places. The vegetable garden Sarah had loved so dearly had gone to weeds and wild grass. Caleb worked from dawn until his body gave out, fell into bed, and woke to do it all again. It was enough to keep them fed. It wasn't enough to keep them whole. "Daddy?" The small voice made him turn. Maggie stood 10 feet away, her blonde hair tangled despite his clumsy attempts with the brush that morning. She wore the blue dress that was getting too small. He'd noticed yesterday but hadn't known what to do about it. 4 years old and already learning to be invisible, to ask for nothing, to expect nothing. "Time to go in, sweetheart." He settled the hat back on his head, pushed down the emotion that wanted to crack him open right there. Men didn't break. Men endured. She slipped her tiny hand into his calloused palm as they walked back toward the house. The 2-story structure stood solid against the horizon, painted white once, now faded to the color of old bones. Smoke rose from the chimney. He'd started the fire before coming out here, one of the 100 small tasks that filled his days like stones filling a well. Inside, the kitchen held the remnants of their simple supper: bread he'd bought in town, beans he'd heated over the stove, an apple cut into careful slices because Maggie's teeth were still small. She ate like a bird, picking at her food while he watched and worried and said nothing. After he'd washed the dishes and she'd changed into her nightgown, backwards, he'd fix it tomorrow, Caleb sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the same bed where Sarah used to sing lullabies. He couldn't carry a tune to save his life, so he just stroked Maggie's hair until her breathing evened out, and she slipped into whatever dreams 4-year-olds had. Standing in the doorway, watching her small form beneath the quilt Sarah had stitched, Caleb felt the weight of his inadequacy settle over his shoulders like a yoke. This wasn't living. This was just surviving, day after day, and what kind of life was he giving this child? The letter sat in his coat pocket, folded and refolded so many times the creases threatened to tear. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, ever since Tom Richardson had cornered him after church with talk of practical solutions and a man's duty to provide proper care. "There's agencies back east," Tom had said, shifting his considerable weight on the church steps. "Women looking for honest situations, widows, some of them, others just wanting a different life. They come west, help with the house and children, respectable arrangement." Caleb had said nothing, just stood there feeling the judgment of every married woman who passed by, their eyes taking in his wrinkled shirt and Maggie's crooked braids. Tom had pressed on. My cousin up in Nebraska brought a woman out 2 years ago. Works out fine. She gets a home. He gets help with his young'uns. Everybody benefits. I'm just saying, Caleb, you got to think about what's best for Maggie. What's best for Maggie? The words had haunted him for days. Now, in the quiet of the evening, with his daughter finally asleep, Caleb pulled the letter from his pocket and spread it on the kitchen table. The paper was cheap, the printing crude, but the words were clear enough. Respectable women seeking honest situations in Western territories. Widowers and established men of good character may inquire. References required both parties. Mrs. Haversham's Domestic Agency, Boston, Massachusetts. He'd written his letter 3 times before getting it right. No flowery language. He didn't have any. No false promises. He didn't believe in them. Just the plain truth. Widower, ranch in Kansas, 4-year-old daughter, seeking woman to help with household and child. Room and board provided. Eventual marriage, if situation proves suitable. The last part had stuck in his throat, made him feel like he was betraying Sarah somehow. But Tom had insisted. You make it clear there's respectability in it, otherwise you'll get the wrong sort, looking for something else entirely. Caleb had sealed the letter with wax he'd had to hunt for in Sarah's old sewing box. Mailed it 4 weeks ago from the postal office in town, trying to ignore the knowing look from Mrs. Henderson behind the counter. 3 responses had come. He'd read them by lamplight, feeling like an intruder on these women's private hopes. The first was from a widow in Philadelphia, 42 years old, 3 grown children of her own. Her letter was businesslike, listing her skills and requirements. She wanted a monthly wage and made no mention of eventual marriage. Caleb had set it aside. The second came from someone younger, maybe too young, with handwriting that looped and swirled with girlish enthusiasm. She wrote about adventure and wide-open spaces and starting fresh. She sounded like she was looking for a story, not a life. He'd burned that one in the stove. The third letter was different. Sir, I am a woman of 26 years, widowed these past 2 years. I can cook, clean, sew, and tend gardens. I am quiet by nature and do not require much. I ask only for honest work and a safe place. I am stronger than I look and willing to earn my keep. I do not expect love and will not demand what cannot be freely given. If you are a man of your word and your situation is as you describe, I will come. Respectfully, Clara Wells. Short, plain, honest in a way that felt like looking in a mirror. He'd written back immediately, surprising himself with the urgency. Gave her the details. Train to Abilene. He'd meet her at the depot on the 15th of October. If she found the situation unsuitable, he'd pay her return fare, no questions asked. Her response came 1 week later, a single line. I will be on the afternoon train. That was 6 days ago. Tomorrow was the 15th. Caleb sat at the table, his coffee going cold in the cup, and wondered what kind of woman answered an advertisement like his. What was she running from? What had her life been that this seemed like a good choice? He wondered, too, what Sarah would think. Would she understand? Would she see this as betrayal or necessity? The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called out, lonely and wild. Caleb drained his cold coffee and went to check the locks, the rifle, the things that kept them safe through another night. In her room, Maggie slept on, dreaming of things he'd never know, needing things he couldn't provide. Tomorrow would bring a stranger to their door. Tomorrow would change everything or nothing. Either way, he'd made his choice. He just hoped it wasn't another mistake in a long line of mistakes that stretched back 3 years to the day Sarah took fever and never got better. But the morning of the 15th dawned cold and clear, the kind of October day that promised winter's approach. Caleb woke before light, as always, and went through the familiar routine. Fire in the stove, coffee in the pot, eggs and bread for breakfast. Maggie appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Morning, sweetheart. He tried for gentle, but his voice came out rough as always. Get dressed now. We're going to town. She nodded silently and disappeared. When she returned, she'd put her dress on correctly for once, though she'd missed 2 buttons. Caleb knelt and fixed them, his big fingers clumsy with the small pearl discs. Are we getting supplies? She asked quietly. Something like that. He didn't know how to explain, didn't know if he should. They ate in silence. Then Caleb hitched the wagon while Maggie waited on the porch, small and patient, and far too accustomed to waiting. The morning was spent on last-minute work, things that couldn't wait, things he used to avoid thinking about what came next. Finally, near noon, they set out for town. The wagon rattled over the dirt road past the Richardson place, past abandoned homesteads where other families had tried and failed to make the prairie yield. Maggie sat beside him wrapped in her coat, not asking questions, just watching the landscape roll by. Abilene appeared on the horizon like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. The town had grown in recent years, fed by the railroad and the cattle drives that came up from Texas. It was rougher than Caleb liked, full of noise and crowds, and the kind of attention he'd spent 3 years avoiding. He drove straight to the depot, a low building that smelled of coal smoke and human passage. The afternoon train from the east wasn't due for another hour. Caleb bought 2 peppermint sticks from the mercantile, one for Maggie, one for the woman who might or might not arrive, and then settled on a bench outside the station to wait. Maggie sucked on her candy in silence, her legs swinging without quite reaching the ground. Other people came and went, businessmen in suits, women with too much perfume, cowboys spending their pay on whiskey, and worse. Caleb kept Maggie close and his hand near the knife in his belt. The train whistle sounded in the distance, mournful and mechanical. Maggie straightened up, interested despite herself. She'd only been on a train once, when they'd traveled to Sarah's family for the funeral. Caleb had no good memories associated with that sound. The locomotive pulled in with a screech of brakes and a blast of steam, all smoke and cinders and eastern industry invading the western prairie. Passengers began to disembark, mostly men, a few families, one woman in an expensive dress who was immediately met by a man in a fine carriage. Caleb stood, his heart doing something uncomfortable in his chest. What if she didn't come? What if she took one look at him and got back on that train? Then he saw her. She stood on the platform with a single worn carpet bag, looking around with an expression that was carefully blank. Brown dress, brown coat, brown hair pulled back in a severe bun. Plain wasn't quite the right word. More like she'd deliberately erased anything that might draw attention. She was thin, maybe too thin, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of poor sleep or worse. But what struck Caleb most was the way she held herself, tense as a deer that knows the wolves are close, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. He approached slowly, hat in hand, Maggie pressed against his leg. "Mrs. Wells?" The woman turned, and for just a moment fear flashed naked across her face before she locked it down. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd expected from her letter, but something in her eyes was older than the prairie itself. "Mr. Harlan?" Her voice was soft, nearly lost in the noise of the depot. "Yes, ma'am." He gestured to Maggie. "This is my daughter Maggie." Clara Wells looked down at the child, and something shifted in her expression, not quite softening, but maybe relaxing slightly. She knelt down slowly, as if sudden movements might startle them both. "Hello, Maggie." She pulled the second peppermint stick from Caleb's hand, he hadn't even realized he was still holding it, and offered it to the girl. "Your father got this for you." Maggie looked up at Caleb for permission. He nodded. She took the candy with a whispered, "Thank you," that Clara had to lean in to hear. When Clara stood, she met Caleb's eyes directly for the first time. Hers were gray, he noted, the color of storm clouds or granite. "I am here, Mr. Harlan, as promised." "Yes, ma'am." He reached for her bag. She flinched before catching herself, but she let him take it. It was lighter than he expected. Everything she owned, probably, and it weighed less than a sack of flour. They walked to the wagon in silence. Caleb helped her up to the seat. She moved stiffly, like someone who'd been traveling too long or hurt too recently, then lifted Maggie up between them. He climbed up last and took the reins. "It's about an hour to the ranch," he said as they pulled away from the depot. "Longer if the wind picks up." "That's fine." Clara sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady clip of the horses' hooves. Maggie divided her attention between the candy and careful glances at the stranger beside her. Finally, Caleb felt compelled to speak. "I should tell you about the arrangement. You'll have your own room. It's small, but it's private. There's work, cooking, cleaning, looking after Maggie. I work the ranch dawn to dusk most days. I'll provide everything you need. And in return? Claire's voice was steady, but he heard the wariness underneath. In return, you stay. Help out. Give Maggie someone who, he struggled for words, someone who can do better than I can. Better than her father? Now there was an edge to her voice, the first real emotion he'd heard. Better than a man who doesn't know how to braid hair or when to add water to the oatmeal or what to do when she cries. The admission cost him, but it was true. I'm not asking you to be her mother. Just help her not grow up quite so wild. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then, what happened to your wife? Fever. 3 years ago this past summer. Doctor said there was nothing to be done. He kept his eyes on the road. She went fast. Maggie doesn't remember her much, which is maybe a mercy. I remember my mother, Maggie said suddenly, her small voice surprising them both. She sang songs, and she smelled like flowers. Caleb's throat tightened. He'd thought she'd forgotten. She'd been so young. Clara looked down at the girl between them. Then you're very lucky. Some people don't have any memories at all. Something in the way she said it made Caleb glance over. Claire's face was carefully composed again, but he'd heard the weight of experience in those words. What about your husband? He asked, then immediately regretted it. You don't have to answer that. He died, she said simply. That's all that matters. But it wasn't, Caleb could tell. There was a story there, one etched in the tension of her shoulders and the careful way she held herself. Still, he was hardly in a position to pry. They were both here carrying their dead. Maybe that was enough common ground for now. The ranch came into view as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Caleb watched Clara's face, trying to gauge her reaction. The house stood plain and weathered, the barn listing slightly to one side, the whole place radiating exactly what it was, hard work and harder living. It's not much, he said. It's more than nothing. Clara's response was matter-of-fact. Which is what I had. He pulled the wagon up to the house and helped them both down. Maggie ran ahead to the porch, suddenly animated by being home. Clara stood looking up at the building, her expression unreadable. Come inside, Caleb said. I'll show you around, then we can discuss details. He led her through the front door into the main room, a combination kitchen and sitting area with a stone fireplace and furniture Sarah had picked out from a catalog 8 years ago. Everything was clean enough but worn, lacking the small touches that made a house feel lived in rather than just occupied. Kitchen's here. I do most of my own cooking, but it's plain fare. Root cellars out back, chicken coop past that. Well, water's good, but you have to prime the pump sometimes. He was talking too much, filling the silence with practical details. Clara nodded, taking it all in with those storm-gray eyes. Maggie's room is upstairs, first door on the right. My room's at the end of the hall. He paused. There's a third bedroom, small. It was supposed to be... He stopped. It's empty. You can have that one. Where did you expect me to sleep? Clara asked, and there was something challenging in the question. I don't know, he admitted. I hadn't thought that far. Most men would have. She met his eyes again, and he saw she was testing him, measuring him against some standard he didn't fully understand. I'm not most men, and this arrangement isn't, He fumbled for words. It's not about that. Then what is it about, Mr. Harlan? My daughter needs someone who knows how to be gentle. I've forgotten how. The honesty came out raw and unvarnished. And you needed somewhere safe, or you wouldn't have answered my letter, so maybe we can help each other without it being more complicated than that. Clara studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Show me the room. He led her upstairs, acutely aware of her presence behind him in a way that made him uncomfortable. The room at the end of the hall had been Sarah's sewing room once. Now it held a narrow bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a window that looked out over the empty prairie. It's not much, he said again, feeling the inadequacy of everything he was offering. It has a door that closes. Clara set her carpetbag on the bed. And a lock. I'm not... He stopped, recognizing the assumption in her words. I won't bother you. You have my word. The word of a stranger. but she said it without heat, just stating fact. Then believe this. I've got enough to manage without adding complications. You keep to yourself, help with Maggie in the house, and we'll get along fine. And if the situation doesn't prove suitable? She was still testing, still wary. You said in your letter I could leave. You can, any time. I'll give you money for the train back east. He meant it, too. If this didn't work, he'd find another way. Somehow. Clara walked to the window and looked out at the darkening landscape. I won't run at the first sign of difficulty. I've survived worse than hard work and a lonely prairie. Then we understand each other. Do we? She turned back to face him. I don't think either of us understands anything yet, Mr. Harlan. But I'm here, and I'll keep my word. That's the most I can promise. It's enough. He moved toward the door. I'll let you settle in. Supper's in an hour. Nothing fancy. I didn't expect fancy. He paused in the doorway. Clara, Mrs. Wells, I want you to know Maggie's been through enough. Whatever else happens here, she comes first. I wouldn't have it any other way. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, something that might have been the beginning of trust flickered in her eyes. Caleb left her there and went back downstairs where Maggie was waiting with questions in her eyes. Is she staying? His daughter asked. For now. He knelt down to her level. Are you all right with that? Maggie considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd learned too young that the world could change in an instant. She seems sad. Maybe she is. Are you sad, Daddy? The question caught him off guard. Sometimes, sweetheart, but I've got you, so I can't be sad all the time. Maggie wrapped her thin arms around his neck. Maybe she needs someone too. Out of the mouths of children, Caleb thought, maybe they all needed someone. Maybe that's all any of them were doing, trying not to be quite so alone in a world that took away the people you loved. That night they ate together for the first time, Caleb, Maggie, and the stranger who'd traveled halfway across the country to this isolated ranch. Clara barely spoke, but she helped with the meal, moving around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to be useful and unobtrusive at the same time. After supper, she volunteered to help Maggie get ready for bed. Caleb listened from downstairs as quiet voices drifted down the hall, Clara reading from a book of fairy tales he'd forgotten they owned, Maggie asking questions in that tentative way she had. When Clara came back downstairs, he was banking the fire for the night. She's asleep, Clara said. She fights it, but she's exhausted. She doesn't sleep well sometimes. Bad dreams. I know something about those. And they stood in the dim light of the dying fire, two damaged people trying to figure out how to exist in the same space. I'll be up before dawn, Caleb said. Ranch work starts early. You don't have to get up with me. I will anyway. Clara moved toward the stairs. I'm not here to be a burden, Mr. Harlan. I'll earn my place. You don't have to prove anything. Yes, she said quietly. I do. Then she was gone. Her footsteps soft on the stairs, the sound of her door closing with careful quietness. Caleb stood alone in the kitchen, wondering what he'd brought into his home. The woman upstairs was running from something. He was certain of that now. But so was he, in his own way, running from the memory of what he'd lost, from the man he used to be, from the capacity to feel anything beyond the daily grind of survival. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the first real cold of approaching winter. Inside, three people who were still strangers to each other settled into an uneasy coexistence that was part hope, part desperation, and entirely uncertain. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The day after, more of the same. But something had shifted with Clara Wells's arrival, some long-frozen part of the house beginning, just barely beginning, to thaw. Caleb climbed the stairs to his own room, past the closed doors that held his daughter and the woman who'd answered his desperate advertisement. He didn't pray, hadn't since Sarah died, but if he had, he might have asked for this to work out, for Maggie's sake, if nothing else. But prayers weren't his currency anymore. He dealt in work and silence and getting through another day. If Clara Wells could help him do that, if she could bring some small measure of peace to this cold house and his hurting child, then maybe this choice wouldn't be another in a long line of mistakes. Maybe this time he'd gotten something right. The prairie wind sang its lonely song outside his window as Caleb lay in bed, staring at shadows on the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. In the room down the hall, Clara Wells lay awake too, listening to the strange sounds of a strange house, wondering if she'd finally found a place to hide from the past or just delayed the inevitable. And between them, Maggie slept, dreaming of a woman who smelled like flowers and another woman with sad gray eyes who'd read her stories. And in her child's heart, she hoped, without knowing how to name it, that maybe, finally, things might start to get better. The night deepened, the stars wheeled overhead, and on a small ranch in the middle of the Kansas prairie, 3 broken people began the long, uncertain work of learning to exist under the same roof, bound together by necessity, desperation, and the faint, fragile possibility that sometimes strangers become something more. The first full day began before sunrise, as Caleb knew it would. He dressed in the dark, moving by memory through the familiar ritual of boots and work shirt, trying to be quiet, but knowing the old floorboards betrayed every step. When he reached the kitchen, a lamp was already burning. Clara stood at the stove, her hair in that same severe bun, wearing the brown dress from yesterday. She'd found the coffee and figured out the temperamental stove, and the smell filled the kitchen with something almost like comfort. "Morning," Caleb said, surprised enough that the word came out awkward. She turned and he saw the exhaustion in her face, the kind that came from a sleepless night, not just tiredness. "I hope you don't mind. I heard you moving around." "No, it's... Thank you." He poured himself a cup, the warmth seeping into his hands. "You didn't have to get up this early." "I told you I would." She cracked eggs into a pan with practiced efficiency. "Besides, I don't sleep much anymore." There was a story in those words, but Caleb didn't press. Instead, he sat at the table and watched her work, noticing the way she moved, careful, economical, always keeping the room in her peripheral vision like she needed to know where the exits were. They ate in silence as the sky outside shifted from black to gray. When he stood to leave, Clara was already clearing the dishes. "I'll be in the south pasture most of the morning," he said. "Fence needs mending. Maggie will sleep another hour or so. I'll figure it out." Clara's voice was firm but not unkind. "That's what I'm here for." He nodded and grabbed his coat, hat, work gloves. At the door he paused. "If you need anything, I won't." She met his eyes. "Go do your work, Mr. Harlan. I'll manage." So he went, out into the cold morning where his breath fogged and the land stretched empty in every direction. The physical labor was a relief, if he was honest. Hammer and wire and fence posts didn't require conversation or careful navigation of what could and couldn't be said. Out here, he knew what he was doing. Inside the house, Clara washed the dishes, then explored the space with the systematic attention of someone taking inventory. The pantry was adequately stocked but unimaginative. Flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, some preserved vegetables that looked like they'd been put up last year and forgotten. The root cellar held potatoes and onions, and not much else. She found Sarah's old apron hanging on a peg and put it on without sentiment. It was just a tool, like the stove or the broom she found in the corner. By the time Maggie's small footsteps sounded on the stairs, Clara had swept the kitchen floor and started inventory of what would be needed from town. Maggie appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her blonde hair a tangled mess. She stood there watching Clara with those solemn brown eyes, waiting. "Good morning," Clara said, keeping her voice soft. "Are you hungry?" Maggie nodded. "Can you get dressed first? Then I'll make you breakfast." The child disappeared upstairs. Clara heard her moving around overhead, taking far longer than a simple task should require. When Maggie finally returned, she'd put on a dress that was stained and missing a button, and her hair was still hopelessly tangled. Clara knelt down, not touching, just observing. "Would you like help with your hair?" "Daddy tries, but he doesn't know how." "I know how." Clara stood and found the brush on a shelf near the wash basin. "Sit here." Maggie climbed onto a chair, and Clara began the patient work of unknotting hair that hadn't been properly brushed in who knows how long. The child winced once, but didn't complain, just sat perfectly still like she was used to enduring discomfort without protest. "Your mama had pretty hair," Clara said quietly, working through a particularly stubborn tangle. I bet she taught you to sit still like this. I don't remember. Maggie's voice was small. Just the smell of flowers. Clara's hands paused, then continued. Lavender, maybe, or lilac. What's that? They're flowers. They smell sweet. Maybe we can plant some in the spring. Daddy says nothing grows here but grass and trouble. Clara almost smiled at that. Your daddy sounds like a practical man, but even practical men can be wrong sometimes. She finished with the hair, braiding it into a neat plait, then found a ribbon in a drawer and tied it off. There. Much better. Maggie reached up to touch the braid, her expression uncertain, like she'd forgotten what it felt like to be properly tended to. Over the next few days, a routine established itself through sheer necessity and repetition. Caleb worked the ranch from dawn until exhaustion. Clara managed the house with quiet competence, cooking meals that were simple but better than anything Caleb had managed, keeping things clean and ordered without making a fuss about it. Maggie watched them both with careful attention, trying to understand these new patterns. On the third night, Caleb came in late to find Clara sitting at the kitchen table with his account book spread before her, a pencil in her hand. What are you doing? He didn't mean for it to sound so harsh, but those were private, his business. Clara didn't flinch. Trying to understand your household budget. You're spending too much on flour from town when you could buy it cheaper in bulk from the mill. And these prices for fabric, you're being robbed. I didn't ask you to look at those. No. She closed the book calmly. But I'm managing your household now, and I can't do that properly without understanding the finances. Unless you'd prefer I just cook what you give me and ask no questions? He stood there, caught between irritation and grudging respect. Sarah had always handled the household accounts. After she died, he'd just muddled through buying what he needed and not thinking too hard about whether he was being taken advantage of. Fine, he said finally, but talk to me before you change anything. Of course. She stood and started to leave, then paused. Mr. Harlan, when's the last time Maggie had clothes that fit properly? The question stung because he knew the answer. I don't know much about that sort of thing. I noticed. I can make her some dresses if you buy fabric, or alter what she has if you prefer. But she's growing, and what she's wearing now won't last the winter. He nodded, feeling the weight of his inadequacy settle heavier. Make a list of what you need. I'll go to town Saturday. I'll have it ready. Saturday came cold and bright. Caleb hitched the wagon early, and when he came back to the house, he found Clara waiting with Maggie beside her. Both were dressed for travel. I should come, Clara said before he could ask. To pick out the fabric and other things. It'll be faster and we'll get what we actually need. He wanted to refuse. Taking Clara into town meant questions, attention, people making assumptions. But she was right, and he was tired of making decisions about things he didn't understand. Fine. Get in. The ride to Abilene took an hour, Maggie between them again. The child had started talking more in the past few days, small comments and questions directed mostly at Clara. The woman answered patiently, never dismissing even the silliest inquiry. Why don't trees grow here? Maggie asked as they passed another stretch of empty grassland. They do, near water, but this land is too dry and the wind too strong. Trees need protection to grow like children do. Did you have trees where you lived before? Claire's expression didn't change, but something in her posture tightened. Yes, many trees. Did you like it there? No. The word was final, closing that door. Caleb glanced over, but Clara's face revealed nothing. She'd been with them almost a week now, and he knew exactly as much about her past as he had the day she arrived. Maybe less, because now he'd seen the nightmares that made her cry out in her sleep, the way she startled at sudden noises, how she positioned herself in every room to see both the door and the window. The woman was running from something. The question was whether it would follow her here. Town was busy with Saturday commerce, wagons and horses crowding the main street. Caleb pulled up to the mercantile and helped them down. Inside, the store smelled of leather and coffee and the pressed sawdust they used to keep the floors clean. Mrs. Henderson stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes taking in their arrival with obvious interest. Mr. Harlan, and this must be the new help I've been hearing about. Mrs. Wells, Caleb said shortly, not liking the speculation in the older woman's voice. She's here to pick up some supplies. I'm sure she is. Mrs. Henderson's smile was all teeth. Nice to see young Maggie looking more cared for. That hair's been properly done for once. Clara stepped forward before Caleb could respond. I need to see your fabric selection. Also, thread, needles, and buttons. Do you have ready-made children's shoes? The list went on, delivered in a tone that was polite but businesslike, giving Mrs. Henderson no room for gossip or questions. Caleb found himself stepping back, watching Clara handle the transaction with practiced ease, negotiating prices and refusing to be swayed by the older woman's attempts to sell her inferior goods at premium prices. She knows her way around a ledger, Mrs. Henderson said to Caleb when Clara had moved away to examine fabric. Educated, is she? I wouldn't know. Caleb kept his voice flat. We don't discuss personal matters. Don't you? The woman's eyebrows rose. Living under the same roof and all. People will talk, you know. Let them. He met her eyes. We're not doing anything wrong. Course not. Just saying, a man alone with a strange woman, no formal arrangement announced. People notice these things. Then people should mind their business. He left Mrs. Henderson standing there and went to help Clara, who'd selected several yards of sturdy cotton and wool. Maggie had found a display of penny candy and was looking at it with the careful longing of a child who'd learned not to ask for things. Pick two, Caleb said gruffly. Maggie's eyes went wide. Really? Two, that's all. She chose carefully, peppermint and lemon drops, clutching them like treasure. Clara watched this exchange without comment, but something in her expression softened slightly. They loaded the supplies into the wagon, Caleb paying from the cash box he kept in his coat. As they were preparing to leave, Tom Richardson emerged from the feed store across the street and made his way over, his considerable bulk moving with surprising speed. Caleb, thought that was your wagon. His eyes went immediately to Clara. And this must be the lady from back east. Tom Richardson, ma'am. I'm the one who suggested to Caleb here that he might benefit from some domestic help. Clara nodded, but didn't offer her hand. Mrs. Wells. How are you finding ranch life? Quite a change from the city, I imagine. I manage. Her tone didn't invite further conversation. Tom, never particularly good at reading social cues, pressed on. Well, you've certainly made a difference already. Young Maggie here looks like a proper little girl again. And Caleb, you're looking less ragged around the edges yourself. We should be going, Caleb said, helping Clara up to the wagon seat. Long drive back? Course, just wanted to say hello. You folks should come by for Sunday dinner sometime. My wife would love to meet Mrs. Wells properly. We'll see. Caleb climbed up and took the reins, eager to be gone from the curious eyes and careful questions. They were almost out of town when they passed the church. Reverend Hayes stood on the steps, talking to parishioners after the morning service. He raised a hand in greeting, and Caleb nodded back but didn't stop. You don't attend services? Clara asked quietly. Not anymore. Because of your wife? Because of a lot of things. He didn't want to talk about this. What about you? I stopped believing in divine intervention some time ago. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but there was old pain underneath. If there's a higher power, it's not particularly interested in protecting the innocent. Maggie had fallen asleep between them, worn out by the excitement of town. In the silence that followed Clara's words, Caleb found himself reassessing the woman beside him. There was steel under that quiet exterior, and something broken that had been broken by force, not accident. What happened to you? He asked before he could stop himself. Clara's jaw tightened. Nothing that concerns you. You're living in my house, caring for my daughter. I think it concerns me. You knew what you were getting when you placed that advertisement. Someone desperate enough to travel halfway across the country to live with a stranger? Did you really think desperation came without a story? She had a point. Still, the not knowing bothered him more than it should. I just want to be sure Maggie's safe. Safe from me? Clara turned to look at him directly, and there was anger there now, burning cold. I would die before I let harm come to that child. But if you're worried about my character, about what I might bring to your door, then you should have been more careful in your selection. You can't have it both ways, Mr. Harlan. You can't demand help from a stranger and then complain that she comes with secrets. The truth of it stung. You're right. I'm sorry. She looked away, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. I'm not dangerous, to you or Maggie, but I have reasons for wanting to stay hidden, and I'd appreciate if you didn't draw attention to our arrangement any more than necessary. Is someone looking for you? Maybe. I don't know. She pulled her shawl tighter. I just know I can't go back. Caleb wanted to ask more, but Maggie stirred between them and he let it drop. Whatever Clara was running from, it had carved deep marks into her. He recognized the look. He saw it in his own mirror every morning. Different causes, same damage. That night, after Maggie was asleep and the house was quiet, Caleb heard it again, the muffled sounds from Clara's room. Not quite crying, more like someone fighting not to make noise. He stood in the hallway, uncertain, then knocked softly. The sounds stopped immediately. After a long moment, Clara's voice came through the door, carefully composed. Yes? Are you all right? I'm fine. Go to bed, Mr. Harlan. But he'd heard the tremor underneath, the crack in the armor. Clara, I said I'm fine. Sharper now. Please leave me alone. He left her alone, but sleep didn't come easy. Lying in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, Caleb wondered what kind of nightmares haunted a woman who'd traveled so far to escape them. The answer came sooner than he expected. 3 nights later, the temperature dropped and brought with it the first real cold snap of the season. Caleb woke to frost on the windows and Maggie coughing in her room. He checked on her. She was warm but restless, her chest tight with the wheeze that sometimes came when the weather changed. He heated water for steam, made her drink warm milk with honey, sat with her until the coughing eased and she fell back into fitful sleep. By then it was nearly dawn, and he was exhausted. Clara found him in the kitchen an hour later, slumped at the table with cold coffee. Maggie? She asked immediately. Chest cold. She gets them sometimes when it turns cold fast. She's sleeping now. Clara moved toward the stairs, but he caught her arm. Let her rest. There's nothing to do but wait it out. She pulled free but didn't go up. Instead, she made fresh coffee, then sat across from him. Does she need medicine? Should we get the doctor? If it gets worse, yes, but usually it passes in a day or two. He rubbed his face. Sarah used to make a poultice with mustard and herbs. I don't remember how. I might. Clara stood and went into the pantry, returning with an armload of jars. She worked methodically, mixing ingredients with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. My mother was sick often. I learned to manage these things. She went upstairs with the mixture, and Caleb heard quiet voices, Clara explaining what she was doing, Maggie's small responses. When Clara came back down, her expression was troubled. She's feverish now. Not dangerously, but it should be watched. I'll sit with her. You need to sleep. You've been up all night. Clara poured him more coffee. I'll watch her. You rest a few hours, then take over if needed. He wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at him. You'll wake me if... I'll wake you. She said it with such certainty that he believed her. Caleb climbed the stairs to his room and fell onto the bed fully clothed. The last thing he heard was Clara's footsteps going into Maggie's room, the creak of the rocking chair as she settled in to keep vigil. He woke hours later to afternoon light and a house that was too quiet. Panic shot through him, that terrible silence that had filled the house when Sarah was dying. He was down the stairs and into Maggie's room before fully conscious. Clara sat in the rocking chair, Maggie curled in her lap, both of them asleep. The child's breathing was easier, the fever broken, sweat dampening her hair, and Clara held her carefully, protectively, one hand resting on Maggie's back as if monitoring every breath. Caleb stood in the doorway, something uncomfortable moving in his chest. His daughter looked small and safe in this stranger's arms. Clara looked less guarded in sleep, younger, the hard edges softened by exhaustion and lamplight. He must have made a sound because Clara's eyes opened immediately, that wariness snapping back into place. But she didn't startle, didn't disturb Maggie. The fever broke an hour ago, she whispered. She's been sleeping peacefully since. You should have woken me. Why? I was here. Clara looked down at the child in her arms. She's brave. Didn't complain once. She's learned not to. Caleb moved into the room, reaching for his daughter. I'll take her. You need rest too. But when he lifted Maggie, the child stirred and made a small sound of protest, reaching back toward Clara. The woman's expression flickered with something that might have been longing before she locked it away. "It's all right," Clara said softly to Maggie. "Your father's here. I'll be nearby." Maggie settled against Caleb's shoulder, but her eyes tracked Clara as the woman stood stiffly, one hand pressed to her lower back. "How long were you sitting there?" he asked. "I don't know. It doesn't matter." Clara moved toward the door, then paused. She called for her mother in her fever. "I didn't know what to say." The confession was quiet, almost vulnerable. Caleb shifted Maggie's weight. "There's nothing to say. The dead don't answer." "No." Clara looked back at them, and her expression was difficult to read. "But sometimes the living can fill the silence, if we're brave enough." She left him there with those words hanging in the air. Caleb held his daughter, feeling her steady breathing against his chest, and wondered if Clara was talking about Maggie or herself or all of them. The next morning, Maggie was weak but improving. She insisted on coming downstairs, and Clara settled her on the sofa with blankets and warm milk. The child watched Clara move around the kitchen with quiet attention, and something had shifted between them. Some invisible line crossed during the long night. "Clara?" Maggie's voice was hoarse but determined. "Yes, sweetheart?" The endearment came naturally, and both Clara and Caleb noticed it at the same moment. Clara's hands stilled in the bread dough she was kneading. Caleb looked up from the harness he was mending. "When I was sick, you sang to me." Maggie pulled the blanket tighter. "Can you sing again?" Clara's face went carefully blank. "I don't really sing." "But you did. I heard you." Maggie's eyes were persistent. "It was pretty. That was just humming, to help you sleep." "Will you do it again?" Caleb watched Clara struggle with the request, saw the resistance in something else, maybe fear of showing too much, of letting these people matter. Finally, she wiped her hands on her apron and came to sit on the edge of the sofa. She hummed softly, a melody that was both sad and soothing. Maggie's eyes drifted closed, a small smile on her face. And Caleb stood frozen by the window, listening to this woman who carried so much damage make something gentle and good for his daughter. When Maggie was asleep again, Clara stood and went back to the bread without comment, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Thank you," Caleb said, "for taking care of her." "It's what I'm here for." "No." He set down the harness. "It's more than that, and you know it. You sat with her all night. You were—" He struggled for words. "Kind. In a way that goes beyond just doing a job." Clara kept her eyes on the dough. "She's easy to care for. She doesn't ask for much. Neither do you." She finally looked at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that you've been here almost 2 weeks, and I don't think you've asked for a single thing for yourself. You work from before dawn until after dark. You eat less than you should. You take the smallest room and never complain about anything." "Should I complain? I have food and shelter and safety. That's more than—" She stopped abruptly. "More than what?" He took a step closer. "More than you had before? This conversation is over." Clara turned back to her work, shoulders rigid. "Clara, I said it's over, Mr. Harlan. You hired me to help with your household. I'm doing that. My past is my own, and I'd appreciate if you'd respect that boundary." He wanted to push, to understand, but he recognized the warning in her voice, so he let it go, picked up the harness, and went back to work. But something had changed. Some wall had developed a crack, and they both knew it. That night, Caleb woke to screaming. He was out of bed and down the hall before fully conscious, operating on instinct and 3 years of practice with Maggie's nightmares. But the sounds weren't coming from his daughter's room. They came from Clara's. He knocked hard. "Clara! Clara, wake up!" The screaming cut off abruptly, replaced by harsh breathing. Then her voice, shaking. "Don't come in, please." "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Just a dream. Go back to bed." But he could hear her crying now, that same muffled sound he'd heard before, only stronger. Without thinking, he opened the door. Clara sat on the bed, knees drawn up, face buried in her hands. She was shaking violently, making those sounds that came from somewhere too deep for regular tears. "I told you not to come in," she said through her hands. "I don't always follow instructions." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, not close but not far. What did you dream about? Nothing. Everything. It doesn't matter. It matters enough to make you scream like that. She raised her head, and even in the dim light he could see the devastation in her face. Do you really want to know? Do you really want to hear about what happened to me? Because once I tell you, you can't unknow it, and you might not want me in this house anymore. Try me. Clara laughed, but it was a broken sound. My husband was not a good man. When he died, it was not peaceful, and it was not an accident, and I was there when it happened. That's all you need to know. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Caleb processed them carefully. Did you kill him? The law says no. I say, she drew a shaky breath. I say I survived him, which amounts to the same thing. And now you're running from someone who doesn't agree with the law's verdict? Maybe. His family has money and connections. They believe I got away with murder. They might come looking, or they might not. I don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself. I just know I couldn't stay where I was. Every day was waiting for them to change their minds, to decide I needed to pay after all. So when I saw your advertisement, it seemed like a chance to disappear. Caleb sat with this information, turning it over. Did he hurt you? Does it matter? Yes. Clara was quiet for a long moment, then, yes, often, in ways that don't leave scars people can see. The simple admission carried the weight of years. Caleb felt something dark and angry move through him, the same rage that had consumed him when Sarah died, that helpless fury at the unfairness of it all. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just... She wiped at her eyes. Just don't tell me I need to leave, not yet. Give me a little more time to figure out where else I can go. Why would I tell you to leave? Because I'm trouble. Because I might bring danger here. Because, Clara. He waited until she looked at him. I don't care about your past. I care about whether you're good to my daughter and whether you'll keep your word. Everything else is just noise. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the judgment, the rejection. When she didn't find it, something in her seemed to crack open. Fresh tears came, and this time she didn't try to hide them. Caleb did something then that surprised them both. He reached out and pulled her against his shoulder, awkward and uncertain, but genuine. She resisted for only a moment before collapsing into it, finally letting someone else carry a portion of the weight she'd been bearing alone. They sat like that for several minutes, two damaged people finding unexpected comfort in shared brokenness. When Clara finally pulled back, she looked exhausted, but somehow lighter. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not being the man I expected you to be. Caleb stood, suddenly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. Get some rest. Morning comes early. Mr. Harlan? He paused at the door. I meant what I said. I would never let anything happen to Maggie. Whatever comes looking for me, I'll face it away from here. I won't let my past hurt her. Our past is always part of us, Caleb said, but it doesn't have to define our future. Sarah taught me that, even if it took me 3 years to remember it. He left her there and went back to his own room. But sleep was a long time coming. In the morning, they would go back to their careful dance of coexistence, but something fundamental had shifted. They'd seen each other's damage now, acknowledged the weight they both carried. And in the weeks that followed, as winter deepened and the prairie grew white with snow, the house slowly transformed from a place of survival into something that almost resembled a home. Fragile and uncertain, built on necessity and shared pain, but real nonetheless. Winter settled over the prairie like a held breath, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and merciless. Snow came in waves, burying the fence lines and turning the daily work of survival into something that required every ounce of strength Caleb possessed. But inside the ranch house, something unexpected was blooming. Clara had been with them almost 3 months now, and the changes were impossible to ignore. Maggie laughed more, her small voice filling rooms that had been silent for years. The kitchen always smelled of bread or stew or something baking. Curtains that hadn't been washed since Sarah died now hung clean at the windows. The house breathed differently, lived differently. And Caleb found himself noticing things he'd sworn he wouldn't notice. The way lamplight caught in Clara's dark hair when she sat mending by the fire. The quiet competence of her hands as she worked. The rare moments when her guard dropped and something that might have been contentment crossed her face. He told himself it meant nothing. She was here to help with Maggie, to manage the household. That was all. The fact that he'd started taking more care with his appearance, shaving more regularly, noticing when she smiled, those were just the natural result of having another adult in the house. Nothing more. But late at night, lying alone in his bed, he couldn't quite convince himself that was true. It was a Saturday morning in early February when everything began to unravel. Caleb had taken the wagon to town for supplies, something he usually did alone, but Clara had asked to come along, needing fabric and thread. Maggie had begged to stay home. She'd been playing in the barn with a litter of barn kittens and didn't want to leave them. "I don't like leaving her alone," Caleb said as he hitched the horses. "She'll be fine for a few hours. We'll be back before lunch." Clara climbed up to the wagon seat, wrapped in the heavy wool coat he'd bought her in December. She'd protested the expense, but he'd insisted. The brown coat she'd arrived in was barely thick enough for autumn, let alone a Kansas winter. They rode in comfortable silence, something that had developed between them over the months, the ability to be quiet together without it feeling awkward or forced. The road was clear, the sky that hard blue that came with bitter cold. "Spring will come eventually," Clara said, watching the frozen landscape roll past. "Hard to believe right now, but it will. You've never seen a prairie spring. It's something else. Everything green all at once, wildflowers as far as you can see." Caleb surprised himself with the enthusiasm in his voice. He hadn't thought about spring with anything but dread since Sarah died, just another season to survive. "Will you teach me their names? The flowers?" "If you want. Though I only know a few. Sarah was the one who knew all the plants." He'd gotten better at saying her name without feeling like he was swallowing glass. Clara had never acted jealous of his memories, never tried to erase the woman who'd come before. If anything, she encouraged Maggie to remember, to talk about the mother she barely recalled. They reached Abilene just before noon, the town busy with Saturday commerce despite the cold. Caleb pulled up to the mercantile and helped Clara down, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary on her waist. She met his eyes briefly, something unspoken passing between them, before turning toward the store. Inside, Mrs. Henderson greeted them with her usual mix of curiosity and barely concealed judgment. "Mr. Harlan, Mrs. Wells, didn't expect to see you both in town today." "Just picking up some things," Caleb said shortly. Clara moved toward the fabric section while Caleb discussed his order with Mrs. Henderson. He was only half listening to the woman's chatter about weather and town gossip when he noticed Clara had gone completely still near the window, her face drained of all color. "Clara?" He moved toward her. "What's wrong?" She didn't respond, just stood frozen, staring out at the street. Caleb followed her gaze and saw a man on horseback, well-dressed, Eastern clothes, riding a horse that was too fine for practical ranch work. The man was asking something of a passerby, gesturing with a piece of paper in his hand. "We need to leave," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Right now." "Who is that?" "Someone from before. We need to go. Please, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the fear in her voice made the decision for him. "Go out the back. I'll meet you at the wagon." But it was too late. The man had seen them through the window, his eyes locking on Clara with unmistakable recognition. He dismounted and headed straight for the store entrance. Clara grabbed Caleb's arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Don't let him take me. Please." "I won't." He positioned himself between her and the door as it opened. The man who entered was in his 30s, handsome in a polished way that spoke of money and privilege. His eyes went straight to Clara, cold and calculating. "Clara." His voice was smooth, cultured, with an edge of steel underneath. "You've led us on quite a chase." "Mr. Thornton." Clara's voice was steady, but Caleb could feel her trembling behind him. "I have nothing to say to you." "That's unfortunate, because I have quite a lot to say to you." Thornton's gaze shifted to Caleb, assessing and dismissive in the same glance. "And you are?" "Caleb Harlan." "This is my property, and Clara is under my protection." "Your protection?" Thornton's laugh was sharp. "And what exactly is this woman to you, Mr. Harlan? Because she failed to mention she had any connections out here. That's none of your concern." Actually, it is very much my concern. Thornton pulled a folded document from his coat. Clara Wells, or should I say Clara Thornton, is wanted for questioning regarding the death of my brother. She fled Boston before the investigation was complete. The words hung in the air like poison. Mrs. Henderson had stopped even pretending to work, openly listening now. Caleb could feel the weight of attention from the other customers in the store. The inquest cleared me, Clara said, her voice stronger now. I was found to have acted in self-defense. A convenient verdict, bought and paid for by sympathetic judges who felt sorry for the poor widow. Thornton's smile was cruel. But my family has resources, Clara. We can make that verdict go away. We can ensure you face a proper trial. For what crime? Caleb stepped forward, putting himself more directly between them. If she was cleared by the law, what right do you have to harass her? The right of family seeking justice for a murdered brother. Thornton's eyes were hard as stone. My brother may have had his faults, but he didn't deserve to die at the hands of his own wife. He deserved worse, Clara said quietly, and there was such cold certainty in her voice that several people in the store gasped. You see? Thornton addressed the growing crowd. She admits it. She killed him and feels no remorse. That's not self-defense. That's murder. That's enough. Caleb's voice cut through the rising murmur. Clara stays with me. If you have legal cause to take her, bring a marshal with proper papers. Otherwise, get out of my sight. Thornton's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Mr. Harlan. Protecting a murderess will only bring you trouble. Then I'll deal with it. But you touch her, and you'll have more than trouble to worry about. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then Thornton smiled, cold and confident. Very well. But this isn't over, Clara. My family doesn't give up easily. We will see justice done, one way or another. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy and walked out, leaving a wake of whispers and speculation. Caleb turned to find Clara standing rigid, her face still pale but her chin raised in defiance. Let's go. They left the mercantile without finishing their shopping, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's attempts at questions. Outside, Thornton was mounting his horse, watching them with that same calculating expression. Think carefully about the choices you make, Mr. Harlan, he called out. Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense. She's not a fugitive. Now get out of my town. Thornton laughed and rode off, but not toward the edge of town, toward the hotel. He was staying then, planning something. The ride back to the ranch was tense and silent. Clara sat beside him, looking straight ahead, her hands clenched white-knuckled in her lap. Caleb wanted to ask questions, to understand what exactly had happened in Boston, but he could see she was barely holding herself together. When they reached the ranch, Maggie came running from the barn, her face bright with excitement about the kittens. She stopped short when she saw Clara's expression. What happened? The child asked, that premature wisdom in her voice again. Nothing, sweetheart. Clara's smile was forced, but she managed it. We just had an unpleasant encounter in town. Let me see these kittens you've been talking about. She took Maggie's hand and walked toward the barn, but Caleb saw how stiffly she moved, like someone preparing for a blow. That night, after Maggie was asleep, Clara came to find him in the kitchen. He'd been sitting at the table, his rifle within reach, going over everything Thornton had said and trying to figure out what it meant. I should leave, Clara said without preamble. Tonight, before this gets worse. No. Caleb, you heard him. He's going to cause trouble. For me, for you, maybe even for Maggie. I won't let that happen. And I won't let him drive you away. Caleb stood facing her. Tell me the truth. All of it. What exactly happened in Boston? Clara moved to the window, staring out at the dark prairie. When she spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless, the only way she could get through it. I married James Thornton when I was 19. He was charming, wealthy, educated. My parents thought I was fortunate. For the first year, I thought so too. She paused, and when she continued, there was a tremor underneath the control. Then he started drinking more, getting angry over small things. The first time he hit me, he cried after and swore it would never happen again. Caleb's hands clenched into fists, but he stayed quiet, letting her tell it. It happened again. And again. Each time worse. He was careful, never where it would show, Never when anyone else was around. To the world, we were the perfect couple. Inside our home, I was a prisoner. She turned to face him, and her eyes were dry but devastated. I tried to leave twice. The first time, his family brought me back, convinced me I was overreacting. The second time, James broke my ribs and locked me in our bedroom for 3 days. Clara, let me finish. You need to know what you're defending. She drew a shaky breath. 2 years ago, James came home drunk and angrier than I'd ever seen him. He'd lost money, made bad investments, and he decided it was my fault somehow. He had a knife. He said he was going to teach me a lesson I'd never forget. The room was utterly silent except for the crackle of the fire. We fought. I was fighting for my life. I knew if I didn't stop him, he would kill me. There was a poker from the fireplace. I grabbed it and I hit him. Her voice cracked. I hit him until he stopped moving, and then I sat there beside his body until morning, waiting to feel something other than relief that I was still alive. The inquest? Found evidence of years of abuse. Servants testified to his violence. A doctor confirmed old injuries. They ruled it self-defense. She wrapped her arms around herself. But James's family never accepted it. The Thorntons are powerful in Boston. Old money, political connections. They couldn't overturn the verdict legally, but they made my life hell anyway. I couldn't work, couldn't go out without being harassed. They wanted me to confess, to say I'd murdered him in cold blood. When I wouldn't, when I kept insisting I'd defended myself, they made it clear they would find other ways to make me pay. So you ran. So I ran. I changed my name, came west, tried to disappear, and it worked until today. She met his eyes. That man, Robert Thornton, is James's older brother. He's the one who orchestrated the campaign against me. And now he's found me, and he won't stop until he's destroyed whatever life I've tried to build. Caleb processed all of this, the pieces falling into place, the nightmares, the way she flinched at sudden movements, her fierce protectiveness of Maggie. Claire wasn't just running from her past. She was running from people who wanted her to pay for having the audacity to survive. You're not leaving, he said firmly. You can't. Clara, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You defended your life against a man who would have killed you. That's not murder. That's survival. And I'll be damned if I let his family punish you for it. But Maggie needs you. She's thriving with you here. You've given her something I couldn't, kindness, gentleness, security. I won't take that away from her because some Eastern lawyer is trying to bully us. This isn't just bullying, Caleb. The Thorntons have resources. They could bring legal action, make your life miserable. They might even try to take Maggie, claim you're unfit because you're harboring a... Let them try. He stepped closer, and his voice was steel. This is my land, my home, and you are under my protection. That means something out here. Tears finally spilled over onto Clara's cheeks. Why? Why would you risk everything for me? Because somewhere in the last 3 months, you stopped being the hired help and became part of this family. Because Maggie loves you. Because He caught himself before finishing that thought, but something of it must have shown in his face because Claire's expression shifted, became something complicated and uncertain. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Maybe not, but you're getting it anyway. She laughed, broken and watery. You're a stubborn man, Caleb Harlan. So I've been told. They stood there in the lamplight, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then Clara did something unexpected. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Caleb's arms came up automatically, pulling her closer, and for a moment they just stood there, drawing strength from each other. He could feel her heartbeat, smell the faint lavender scent she'd started using. Maggie had been right about the flowers. And something in his chest cracked open, letting in feelings he'd thought died with Sarah. Thank you, Clara murmured against his shoulder, for believing me, for not sending me away. You're one of us now. We protect our own. She pulled back to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Caleb! A sound outside cut her off. Horses approaching fast, multiple riders. Caleb's hand went immediately to his rifle, and Clara's face went white. Stay here with Maggie, he ordered, moving toward the door. Caleb, wait! but he was already outside, rifle in hand, positioning himself on the porch. 4 riders approached through the darkness, and in the light from the house windows he recognized Thornton at the front. The other 3 were rough-looking men, hired muscle by the look of them. "Mr. Harlan!" Thornton called out, reining in his horse at a safe distance. "I've come to make you an offer." "Not interested." "You haven't heard it yet. I'm prepared to pay you a substantial sum, let's say $500, if you convince Clara to return to Boston with me voluntarily. No violence, no legal complications. Just a business transaction. Clara's not for sale." "Everyone has a price, Mr. Harlan. Surely a struggling rancher could use $500. Think what it could do for that little girl of yours." Rage flooded through Caleb, hot and sharp. "Get off my property." "I'm trying to be reasonable here." Thornton's voice hardened. "But if you insist on being difficult, I have other options. I could claim you've kidnapped Clara, or holding her against her will. Or perhaps I should mention to the townspeople that you're living in sin with a woman who's not your wife. That could cause problems for a man trying to raise a daughter, couldn't it? Last warning, leave now or I start shooting." "You'd shoot an unarmed man in front of witnesses?" "You brought armed men to threaten my family. That makes you fair game in my book." One of the hired men shifted in his saddle, and Caleb swung the rifle toward him. "Don't even think about it." The tension stretched like wire ready to snap. Then from behind Caleb, Clara's voice cut through the night. "I'll go with you." "No." Caleb didn't turn, didn't take his eyes off Thornton. "Get back inside." "I won't let you get hurt because of me." Clara moved to stand beside him, and he could see she was shaking, but determined. "I'll return to Boston, face whatever legal action you think you can bring. Just leave these people alone." "Clara, that's very sensible of you." Thornton's smile was triumphant. "Get your things. We leave tonight." "Like hell." Caleb stepped in front of her. "She's not going anywhere." "Mr. Harlan, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. And you're about to find out what happens when you threaten a man's family on his own land." "Your family?" Thornton's laugh was sharp. "She's not your wife. She's barely even your servant. You have no legal claim to her whatsoever." "Then I'll make one." The words came out before Caleb fully thought them through. "Clara's my wife. Has been for weeks now. We just haven't announced it yet." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara stared at him, shock written across her face. Thornton's expression darkened dangerously. "You're lying." "Prove it." Caleb's voice was steady, certain. "We were married by Reverend Hayes, private ceremony, but legal enough. So she's got my name and my protection, and you've got no claim on her at all. That's a convenient story." "It's the truth." Caleb put his arm around Clara's shoulders, feeling her trembling under his touch. "Now get off my land before I exercise my right to defend it." For a long moment, Thornton just sat there, rage and calculation warring on his face. Then he gestured to his men and wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over, Harlan. I'll verify your claims, and if I find out you're lying, you know where to find me." Thornton rode off into the darkness, his hired men following. But there was a promise in the way he left, a certainty that this was far from finished. Caleb stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, his rifle still in hand, Clara still pressed against his side. Only when he was certain they were gone did he lower the weapon and turn to face her. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I shouldn't have—" "That was brilliant," Clara finished, and there was something like wonder in her voice. "And completely insane. It bought us time, but he'll check when he finds out we're not actually married. Then we make it true." Caleb stared at her. "What? Marry me?" Clara's voice was steady despite the wildness of what she was proposing. "Make your lie into truth. It's the only way to give me legal protection from the Thorntons. As your wife, I'd be under your authority by law. They couldn't force me to return to Boston, couldn't bring charges without your permission. Clara, we can't just—" "Why not?" She stepped back to look at him fully. "We're already living as a household. Maggie already thinks of us as a family unit. The only thing missing is the legal binding, and right now, that's exactly what we need." "But you'd be trapped here, bound to me legally. After everything you went through with your first husband, you're not him." She said it with absolute certainty. In 3 months, you've never raised your voice to me in anger, never tried to control me, never made me feel like less than human. You've been kind and respectful and decent. Those are things I never thought I'd find in a man again. That's just basic human behavior. Not to me, it isn't. She took his hand, her fingers cold in his. I'm not saying this has to be a real marriage in every sense. We can keep our arrangement exactly as it is, separate rooms, separate lives, just legally bound for protection. But Caleb, this solves both our problems. You need help with Maggie and the ranch. I need legal protection from people who want to destroy me. Why not make it official? He wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go wrong. But looking at her face, determined, hopeful, scared but trying to be brave, he found himself considering it. The house had been better with her in it. Maggie had been better. Even he had been better, working with purpose again instead of just surviving each day. And if he was being honest with himself, the thought of Clara leaving, of the house going back to that cold silence, was unbearable. If we do this, he said slowly, it has to be your choice. Not because you're scared or desperate, but because you actually want to stay here. With us. I do want to stay. These past months have been... She struggled for words. I've been happier here than I've been in years. Maggie makes me remember what it's like to believe in good things. This place makes me feel safe. And you... She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. And me what? And you make me think maybe I'm not as broken as I thought I was. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Caleb realized he was still holding her hand, her fingers warming slowly in his grip. All right, he said, surprising himself with how easily the decision came. We'll do it. Tomorrow I'll ride to town, talk to Reverend Hayes, make the arrangements. But Clara, I need you to understand, once we do this, I take my vows seriously. You'd be my wife, under my protection, part of my family. I don't do anything halfway. Neither do I, she squeezed his hand. When I make a promise, I keep it, even the hard ones. They stood there on the porch, the cold wind whipping around them, two damaged people choosing to bind their lives together for reasons that were part practical necessity and part something neither was quite ready to name. From inside the house, a small voice called out, "Daddy? Clara? Is everything all right?" They'd woken Maggie with the confrontation. Clara pulled away gently and headed inside, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts and his rifle and the certainty that he'd just set in motion something that would change all their lives forever. He didn't know yet that in 3 days, Robert Thornton would return with a different kind of threat. He didn't know that Clara's past would demand payment in blood before it was done. He didn't know that the choice he'd just made would force him to become someone different from the man who'd stood over Sarah's grave and sworn never to care that deeply again. All he knew was that inside his house, Clara was comforting his daughter, her quiet voice carrying through the door like a promise of better things. And for tonight, that was enough. Morning came too fast, and with it, the weight of decisions made in darkness. Caleb stood in the barn before dawn, pitchfork in hand, staring at nothing while his mind raced through everything that had happened, everything he'd promised. Marry Clara. Make the lie true. Bind himself legally to a woman he barely knew, all to protect her from a past that was already knocking at his door. The rational part of his brain screamed that this was madness, but the part that had watched Clara sit up all night with his sick daughter, that had seen Maggie smile for the first time in years, that part knew he'd make the same choice 100 times over. He finished the morning chores mechanically, then headed to the house. Inside, Clara was already up, moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as he had. "Morning," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Morning." She poured him coffee without being asked. Their routine so established now, it felt like it had always been this way. "I've been thinking about yesterday." "So have I." "And?" She set the cup in front of him, her hands steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "And I meant what I said. If you still want to do this, I'll ride to town today, make the arrangements with Reverend Hayes." Clara sat down across from him, her fingers wrapped around her own cup. "Before you do that, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you last night, but I was too frightened." Caleb's stomach tightened. "What is it?" "Robert Thornton isn't just trying to bring me back to face charges. He wants something else. She met his eyes. James, my husband, he had money set aside, investments, property. When he died, it all came to me as his widow. The Thornton family contested the will, but the court upheld it. I have access to nearly $50,000. Caleb nearly dropped his coffee. 50,000? It's tied up in banks back east, and I can't access it without revealing where I am. But that's what Robert really wants. He wants me to sign everything over to the family, to renounce any claim to James's estate. The murder accusations are just leverage to force me to comply. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I didn't want you to think I was using you, that I had ulterior motives for being here. Claire's voice was steady, but her eyes pleaded for understanding. That money is blood money to me. I don't want it. Don't want anything that came from James. But the Thorntons see it as family wealth that I stole by killing their son and brother. Caleb sat back, processing this new information. $50,000 was more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes of ranching. It changed everything and nothing at the same time. Do they know you have access to it? They know I haven't touched it. I think Robert believes I'm waiting until things die down. Then I'll withdraw it and disappear completely. He wants to find me before that happens. And if we marry, what happens to the money then? Legally, it would become yours to manage. As my husband, you'd have authority over my assets. She said it carefully, watching his reaction. That's another reason I need you to understand what you'd be agreeing to. This isn't just about protecting me from false charges. It's about refusing a fortune that powerful people believe belongs to them. Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out at his land. 200 acres of stubborn survival. A life built on hard work and modest means. That money could transform everything. New barn, better stock, hired hands to ease the burden, security for Maggie's future. I don't want their money, he said finally. What? I don't want anything that came from a man who hurt you. He turned to face her. If we do this, that money stays exactly where it is. Let it rot in whatever bank holds it. I won't profit from your suffering. Something shifted in Claire's expression, surprise, relief, and something deeper that she quickly hid. That's a lot of money to refuse on principle. Some things matter more than money. You taught me that watching you with Maggie. You could have just done your job, kept your distance, collected your pay. Instead, you love her like she's your own. That kind of goodness doesn't come from wealth. It comes from character. And I'll be damned if I let those Eastern bastards make you feel like you owe them anything. Claire's eyes filled with tears. You mean that? Every word. She stood and crossed to him, and for a moment they just looked at each other, this man and woman who'd found each other through a desperate advertisement, who were about to bind their lives together for reasons that got more complicated by the hour. Then yes, Clara said quietly, let's make this real. Let's get married. Footsteps on the stairs made them step apart. Maggie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her blonde braid messy from tossing in bed. Why are you both up so early? The child asked. Caleb knelt down to her level. Sweetheart, Clara and I need to talk to you about something important. Maggie's eyes went immediately wary, the look of a child who'd learned that important conversations usually meant bad things. Is Clara leaving? No. Clara came to kneel beside Caleb. Actually, the opposite. Your father and I have decided to get married. That means I'd be staying here permanently, becoming part of your family in an official way. Maggie looked between them, trying to process this. Like how Mama was part of the family? The question hung heavy in the air. Caleb felt his throat tighten, but Clara answered with gentle honesty. Yes and no. Your mama will always be your mama. Nothing changes that. But I'd be here to take care of you, to be another person who loves you, if that's all right with you. Would I call you Mama? You can call me whatever feels right to you. Clara is fine. Or if someday you want to call me something else, that's fine too. Maggie was quiet for a long moment, her small face serious. Then she turned to Caleb. Do you love her? The question caught him completely off guard. Clara's eyes widened, and he could see she was holding her breath. He struggled for words that would be honest but not overwhelming. I care about Clara very much. She's been good to us, good to you, and I want her to stay. Mama used to say love is when you want someone to be happy, even more than you want to be happy yourself. Maggie looked at Clara. Does Daddy make you happy? Clara's voice was thick with emotion. Yes, sweetheart, he does. And so do you. Then I think you should get married. Maggie stated it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Can I help pick flowers for the wedding? Just like that, the tension broke. Clara laughed, watery but genuine, and pulled Maggie into a hug. Caleb stood there watching them, his daughter and the woman who was about to become his wife, and felt something unlock in his chest, something that had been frozen since Sarah died. An hour later, Caleb rode into town alone. The morning was bright and cold, his breath fogging in the air, his mind still spinning with the enormity of what he was about to do. He went straight to the church, a simple white building at the edge of town that he hadn't entered since Sarah's funeral. Reverend Hayes was in his study, a kindly man in his 60s who'd known Caleb since he first came to Kansas. The Reverend looked up in surprise when Caleb knocked on the open door. Caleb Harlan, I haven't seen you in these halls in quite some time. I know, sir. I'm not here for services. Caleb removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. I need to arrange a marriage. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. I'd heard you brought a woman out from the east. Mrs. Wells, isn't it? Yes, sir. Clara. We want to be married, soon as possible. I see. Reverend Hayes gestured for Caleb to sit. This is rather sudden. You've only known each other a few months. It's complicated, sir. There are legal reasons, protection she needs. But it's not just that. Caleb struggled to explain. She's good for Maggie, good for the ranch. We work well together, and I... He stopped, realizing something as he said it. I don't want to lose her. Do you love her? The same question Maggie had asked, but harder coming from a man of faith. Caleb thought about it honestly, the way his heart kicked when Clara smiled, the comfort of her presence, the rightness of her being in his home. Was that love? Or just loneliness finding relief? I don't know, he admitted. I love my Sarah with everything I had. This feels different, but it feels real. Reverend Hayes studied him with those sharp, kind eyes. Love takes many forms, Caleb. What you had with Sarah was built over years of courtship and marriage. What you're building with Clara is starting from different ground. Necessity, respect, shared purpose. That doesn't make it less valid. So you'll marry us? I will. But I need to meet with Clara first. Make sure this is truly her choice. Some women in difficult circumstances feel they have no options, and I won't perform a marriage where one party feels forced. She's not forced. It's her idea as much as mine. Then she won't mind speaking with me. Bring her tomorrow afternoon. We'll talk. And if I'm satisfied you're both entering this with clear minds and honest intentions, I'll perform the ceremony the day after. Caleb shook the Reverend's hand and left, feeling both relieved and terrified. 2 days. In 2 days, Clara would be his wife. Maggie would have a mother figure who was legally bound to them, and he'd be taking on all the trouble that came with Clara's past. He stopped by the mercantile to pick up supplies, trying to ignore the stares and whispers that followed him. News traveled fast in small towns, and his confrontation with Thornton yesterday had clearly made the rounds. Mrs. Henderson was practically vibrating with curiosity when he approached the counter. Mr. Harlan, I heard you had some excitement at your place last night. News travels. He kept his voice neutral, handing her his list. That Eastern gentleman has been asking all sorts of questions about Mrs. Wells, saying some rather concerning things about her character. Mrs. Henderson's eyes gleamed with malicious interest. Is it true she killed her husband? Mrs. Wells defended herself against an abusive man. The law cleared her of any wrongdoing. Everything else is gossip and lies. Well, some are saying you're taking a big risk, keeping a woman like that around your young daughter. Caleb leaned forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to say this once. Clara Wells is under my protection. Anyone who spreads rumors about her answers to me. Is that clear? The older woman actually stepped back, surprise and a hint of fear crossing her face. I'm just repeating what I've heard. Then stop hearing it. Now get my supplies together. I have better things to do than stand here listening to small-minded gossip. He left with his purchases, knowing he'd just made an enemy but not caring. Let them talk. Let them judge. Clara was his now, or would be soon enough. And he'd defend her with the same ferocity he'd defend Maggie. But riding back to the ranch, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were moving too fast, spinning out of control. In 3 days, everything about his life had changed. The careful isolation he'd maintained for 3 years was shattering, forcing him back into the world of conflict and consequence. He found Clara in the garden behind the house, such as it was, mostly dead weeds and frozen earth now, but she was out there with a notebook, planning what she'd plant come spring. Maggie played nearby, making snow angels and talking to herself the way children do. "Reverend Hayes will see us tomorrow afternoon," Caleb said, dismounting. "He wants to talk to you. Make sure you're certain about this." Clara nodded, brushing dirt from her hands. "That's reasonable. What will you tell people? About why we're marrying so suddenly?" "The truth, that we've been living as a household for months, that it makes sense to make it official. The details are nobody's business but ours." "Some will assume I'm pregnant." She said it matter-of-factly, but he saw the worry underneath. That kind of talk could hurt Maggie. Let them assume what they want. People who matter will see the truth. They walked back to the house together, Maggie running ahead to check on her kittens in the barn. Standing on the porch, Clara turned to face him. "Caleb, there's still time to change your mind. If this is too much, too fast, it's not." He surprised himself with how certain he sounded. "Is it for you?" "No, but I worry about what I'm bringing into your life. Robert Thornton isn't going to just disappear. And there may be others, people from my past who want answers or revenge or the money. You and Maggie could get caught in that. Then we'll handle it together." He reached out and took her hand, the gesture feeling both foreign and familiar. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Standing together against whatever comes? In theory. In practice, it's often very different. Then we'll be the exception. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not your first husband, Clara. I'm not going to hurt you or control you or make you regret this choice. But I'm going to stand by you, protect you, and make sure those Eastern bastards understand they can't touch you anymore." She looked up at him, and in her gray eyes he saw the war between hope and fear, between the desire to believe and the hard-learned knowledge that trust was dangerous. "I want to believe that," she whispered, "then start trying. One day at a time." The next afternoon they rode to town together, all three of them dressed in their Sunday best. Maggie chattered excitedly about the wedding, asking questions about dresses and flowers and cake. Clara answered patiently, though Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders as they approached the church. Reverend Hayes met them at the door, his expression warm but serious. He suggested Caleb take Maggie for a walk while he spoke with Clara privately. Caleb hesitated, but Clara nodded that it was all right. "Come on, sweetheart," he said to Maggie. "Let's go see if the Mercantile has any new penny candy." They walked through town, Maggie's hand in his, and he found himself watching the people they passed, noting the stares and whispers. Tom Richardson stopped them outside the feed store. "Caleb, heard some interesting news. You planning to make an honest woman out of your housekeeper?" The comment rankled, but Caleb kept his voice even. "Clara and I are getting married tomorrow. You're welcome to come if you can keep your opinions to yourself." Tom's expression shifted to something more respectful. "Well now, that's wonderful news. My wife will be pleased. She's been worried about appearances, with the two of you living under one roof unwed. We've done nothing improper. Course not. But still, good to make it official. That Eastern fellow still hanging around asking questions. Haven't seen him since the other night. Well, he's staying at the hotel, making a nuisance of himself, asking about Clara's character, trying to dig up dirt. Haven't found anyone willing to speak ill of her, though. She keeps to herself, but folks have noticed how good Maggie looks now. How well cared for." Caleb felt a rush of gratitude for small-town solidarity, whatever its motivations. "Appreciate you telling me." When they returned to the church, Clara was standing outside with the Reverend, her face pale, but composed. Reverend Hayes nodded to Caleb. "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll keep it simple and private, just the vows and the signing of the certificate. Mrs. Wells has assured me she's entering this marriage of her own free will, with full understanding of what she's undertaking." "Thank you, sir." That night, after Maggie was asleep, Caleb and Clara sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee growing cold between them. Tomorrow they'd be married. Tomorrow everything would change and stay the same all at once. "Are you scared?" Clara asked quietly. "Terrified," Caleb admitted. "You?" "More than I can say." She smiled slightly, but also relieved and hopeful and grateful. It's a complicated feeling. Sarah used to say the best decisions are the ones that make you feel 100 different things at once. The easy choices are usually the wrong ones. She sounds like she was wise. She was. She would have liked you, I think. You're both stubborn and kind in the same breath. Claire's eyes misted. I hope so. I hope she wouldn't think I was trying to replace her. You're not replacing her. You're just being you. That's enough. He reached across the table and took her hand. Clara, I know we're doing this for practical reasons, but I want you to know something. I will try to be a good husband to you. Not like before, not like Sarah and me, but in whatever way makes sense for us. I won't demand things you're not ready to give, but I will stand by my vows. You'll have my respect, my protection, and my loyalty. Always. And you'll have mine. She squeezed his hand. I may not be ready for everything a wife is supposed to be, but I can promise you honesty, hard work, and care for this family. That's the best of what I have to offer. It's more than enough. They sat there in the lamplight, holding hands across the table. Two people who'd come together out of desperation and were choosing to stay together out of something that was starting to feel like it might be more. The wedding was small and quiet, held in the church with only Reverend Hayes, his wife, and Tom Richardson and his wife as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress she'd made herself, and Caleb had shaved and worn his one good suit. Maggie stood between them in a new white dress, holding a bouquet of dried flowers and evergreen branches. The ceremony was brief, the words familiar but weighted with new meaning. When Reverend Hayes asked if they took each other as husband and wife, both answered clearly, firmly, no hesitation. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Caleb. The moment stretched out, both of them suddenly uncertain. Then Caleb leaned down and kissed Clara gently, briefly, a promise more than passion. When they pulled apart, there were tears on her cheeks. They signed the certificate, making it legal and binding. Clara Wells became Clara Harlan with a few strokes of a pen. Tom Richardson clapped Caleb on the back. His wife hugged Clara and welcomed her to the community properly. Maggie bounced excitedly, talking about how she'd helped pick the flowers. As they were leaving the church, Robert Thornton appeared at the bottom of the steps. He'd clearly been waiting, watching. His expression was cold fury barely contained. Very clever, Mrs. Thornton. Or should I say Mrs. Harlan now? You should leave, Caleb said, moving Clara and Maggie behind him. I will. But not before I tell you what you've just done. You've married a murderess, Mr. Harlan. You've bound yourself legally to a woman who bludgeoned her husband to death in cold blood. And when my family's lawyers are done examining this convenient marriage, when they prove you helped her escape justice, you'll find yourself facing charges too. Aiding and abetting, conspiracy, fraud. Take your pick. We've done nothing illegal. Claire was cleared by the law and our marriage is legitimate. We'll see what a judge says about that. Thornton's smile was cruel. Enjoy your wedding night. It may be your last peaceful evening for a very long time. He walked away, leaving them standing there as townspeople began to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Clara was trembling, and Maggie looked frightened, not understanding but sensing danger. Let's go home, Caleb said quietly, guiding them to the wagon. The ride back was silent, all the joy of the ceremony leached away by Thornton's threats. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped them down and was about to start unhitching the horses when Clara stopped him. Caleb, I need to say something. Can it wait? No. Her voice was firm. I need to say this now, while I have the courage. Today you married me, bound yourself to all my troubles and complications. You did it to protect me, and I'll never forget that. But I want you to know it means more to me than just legal protection. For the first time since I was 19 years old, I feel like I have a partner, someone who sees me as a person worth defending instead of property to be controlled. That's a gift I never thought I'd have again. She stood on her toes and kissed him, longer than the brief touch in the church, with genuine feeling behind it. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing us." Before Caleb could respond, before he could process the way his heart was hammering in his chest, a sound cut through the evening, horses approaching fast, multiple riders. They turned to see 6 men riding hard toward the ranch, and at the front was Robert Thornton, rage written across his face. But this time, there was something different. These weren't hired muscle. They were harder men, professional in their movements. And Thornton himself had a rifle across his saddle. "Get Maggie inside," Caleb said urgently. "Now!" Clara scooped up the child and ran for the house. Caleb reached for his own rifle, always kept loaded near the door, and positioned himself on the porch. The riders pulled up 20 feet from the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Thornton dismounted slowly, deliberately, his hand resting on his pistol. "Final offer, Harlan. Annul the marriage, sign Clara over to my custody, and walk away. I'll even pay you for your trouble, let's say $2,000, enough to soothe your wounded pride. Go to hell." "Wrong answer." Thornton's hand moved toward his gun. What happened next moved with terrible speed. Caleb brought his rifle up, shouting a warning. One of Thornton's men drew his pistol. A shot rang out, not from Caleb, not from Thornton's men, but from the house. Clara stood in the doorway, Caleb's old revolver in her hand, smoking barrel pointed at the sky. "The next one won't be a warning," she said, her voice steady as stone. "I've killed one man who tried to hurt me. I won't hesitate to kill another." The threat hung in the air, and for a moment everything balanced on a knife's edge. Then Thornton laughed, harsh and bitter. "You've made your choice, both of you. When my family's lawyers are through with you, when the law comes calling, remember this moment. Remember you chose this." He remounted and gestured to his men. But as they turned to leave, he looked back at Clara with such hatred that it was almost physical. "You'll pay for what you did to James. One way or another, you'll pay." Then they were gone, dust rising in their wake, leaving Caleb and Clara standing in the aftermath, both holding guns, both knowing this was far from over. Inside, Maggie was crying, frightened by the violence and tension. Clara holstered the gun and went to comfort her, and Caleb stood at the window, watching the empty road, his mind already working through what needed to happen next. That night, after Maggie finally fell asleep, exhausted by fear and confusion, Caleb and Clara sat in the kitchen, the weight of the day pressing down on them. They were married now, legally bound, facing threats that could destroy everything they were trying to build. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I brought this into your life. I should have—" "Stop," Caleb cut her off. "We made our choice. Both of us. And I'd make it again. But Clara, we need to be realistic. Thornton's not going to stop. He'll keep pushing until something breaks. Then what do? We prepare. And we decide right now. How far are we willing to go to protect this family?" Clara met his eyes, and there was steel there, forged in fires he could only imagine. "As far as it takes. Even if it means violence? I've already killed one man to survive. I won't let another take away the life I've finally found." She reached across the table and gripped his hand. "We protect Maggie. We protect each other. And if Thornton or anyone else tries to destroy that, we stop them, whatever it takes." Caleb nodded slowly, understanding they'd just crossed another line, made another choice that couldn't be undone. They were no longer just two people trying to survive. They were a family, bound together, willing to fight for what they'd built. Outside, the prairie wind sang its lonely song, and somewhere in the darkness, enemies planned and plotted. But inside the ranch house, 3 people, now legally a family, held together against whatever storm was coming, choosing courage over fear, choosing each other over safety, choosing to become something more than the broken pieces they'd been alone. The days following the wedding passed in a strange tension, like the air before a storm breaks. Caleb worked the ranch with his rifle always within reach, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Clara moved through the house with the same quiet efficiency, but now she kept the revolver tucked in her apron pocket, and Maggie noticed everything with the sharp awareness of a child who'd learned too young that the world wasn't always safe. 3 days after the confrontation, Tom Richardson rode out to the ranch, his face grave. Caleb met him at the gate, hand resting on his rifle. "Easy, Caleb. I'm here as a friend." Tom dismounted heavily. "That Thornton fellow left town yesterday morning, took the eastbound train. But before he went, he filed papers with the territorial court claiming you and Clara committed marriage fraud to help her escape justice. Caleb's jaw tightened. Can he do that? He can file anything he wants. Whether it holds up is another matter. Tom pulled out a folded document. Judge Morrison asked me to bring you this. It's a summons for you and Clara to appear before the court next month to answer the allegations. And if we don't appear? Then they can issue a warrant for arrest. Look, Caleb, I'm not a lawyer, but seems to me you got married legal and proper. Reverend Hayes will testify to that, and so will I. This whole thing about helping her escape justice, the woman was already cleared by a legal inquest back east. Thornton's just angry and trying to use the law to bully you. What does Judge Morrison think? Between you and me, he thinks it's horse shit, but he has to follow procedure. Tom shifted his weight. My advice? Get yourself a good lawyer, present the facts, show that Clara was cleared of wrongdoing and your marriage is legitimate. The judge is a fair man. He won't let some Eastern money throw his weight around without cause. After Tom left, Caleb brought the papers inside where Clara was teaching Maggie her letters at the kitchen table. She looked up, saw his expression, and immediately sent Maggie outside to check on the chickens. What is it? He handed her the summons. She read it slowly, her face draining of color. He's not going to stop. Even from Boston, he's going to keep coming after us. Then we fight him in court. We tell the truth and let the law decide. The law doesn't always care about truth. It cares about money and influence, and the Thorntons have both. Clara set the paper down with shaking hands. Maybe I should just leave. Disappear somewhere else. Let you and Maggie have peace. No. Caleb's voice was iron. We're married now. That means we face this together. Running won't solve anything. Thornton will just keep hunting you. But if we stand our ground, prove there's nothing to his claims, maybe he'll finally give up. And if he doesn't, if he finds some way to make the charges stick, then we deal with that when it comes. He pulled her to her feet, holding her shoulders so she had to meet his eyes. Clara, I need you to trust me. Not blind trust. You've earned the right to be suspicious of men making promises, but trust that I meant my vows. You're my wife now. That means something to me. She searched his face, and slowly the fear gave way to something steadier. All right, we fight. The next weeks were spent preparing their case. Caleb hired a lawyer from Topeka, a sharp-eyed man named Samuel Whitmore, who listened to their story with careful attention and asked questions that cut to the heart of things. The key issue, Whitmore explained, sitting in their kitchen with papers spread before him, is proving your marriage is genuine and not a fraud designed to circumvent the law. The fact that Mrs. Harlan, he nodded to Clara, was already cleared by legal inquest in Boston severely undermines Thornton's claims, but we need to demonstrate that this marriage has substance beyond legal convenience. What does that mean? Caleb asked. It means showing you're building a real life together. Shared household, shared responsibilities, genuine affection. The court needs to see this as a legitimate union, not a business arrangement with vows attached. Clara and Caleb exchanged glances. The truth was complicated. Their marriage was both real and not real, built on necessity, but growing into something neither had quite expected. We share a home, Clara said carefully. I manage the household, care for his daughter. We work together to maintain the ranch. And the personal aspect of the marriage? Whitmore asked delicately. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Caleb spoke. We're still finding our way, but there's genuine care between us. Anyone who knows us can see that. Whitmore made notes. Then that's what we present. A couple who married quickly out of practical necessity, which was common enough on the frontier, but who are building a genuine partnership. Combined with testimony about Clara's cleared status in Boston, it should be enough to dismiss Thornton's claims. After the lawyer left, Caleb found Clara in the garden, or what would be a garden come spring. She was standing there with her coat wrapped tight, staring at the frozen ground. You're worried, he said, coming to stand beside her. I'm terrified. What Whitmore said about proving genuine affection, Caleb, we barely know each other. We've shared a home for months, yes, but we're still strangers in so many ways. What if the judge sees through us? What if he decides this is exactly what Thornton claims, a fraud. Then we make it real. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through, but once said, he realized he meant them. Not just on paper, not just for the court. We make this marriage real in every way that matters. She turned to face him, surprise and uncertainty warring in her expression. What are you saying? I'm saying we stop treating this like a temporary arrangement. We stop keeping so much distance between us. He struggled for words. We try, really try, to be what we claimed to be when we took those vows. Caleb, I can't just, the thought of being with someone again, after James, I'm not talking about that. Not until you're ready, if ever. I'm talking about letting down the walls, talking to each other like partners instead of polite strangers, sharing the load instead of carrying everything separately. He took her hand, cold in his. I'm talking about building something real, Clara, something worth fighting for. Tears spilled over onto her cheeks. I want that. I'm just so scared of wanting it. Every time I let myself hope for good things, they get taken away. Then we hold on tight and refuse to let go. He pulled her close, and this time she didn't stiffen or pull back. She melted into him, accepting the comfort, accepting the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this could work. From the house, Maggie's voice called out asking where they were, and they separated, wiping eyes and straightening clothes. But something had shifted between them, some invisible barrier beginning to dissolve. That night, after Maggie was asleep, they sat together by the fire, not at opposite ends of the room as had been their habit, but side by side on the old sofa. Clara was mending one of Caleb's shirts, and he was oiling his saddle, and it felt domestic and right in a way that surprised them both. Tell me about Sarah, Clara said quietly. Really tell me, not just the facts, but who she was. Caleb's hand stilled on the leather. For 3 years, he'd avoided talking about his first wife, keeping those memories locked away like precious things that might shatter if exposed to air. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe keeping them locked away was what kept him locked away too. She was stubborn, he began, a small smile touching his lips. Insisted on coming west even though her family was horrified. Said she'd rather have adventure with me than safety with anyone else. He worked the oil into a stubborn spot. She made everything feel possible. Even when the crops failed that first year, even when we lost half our cattle to sickness, she just rolled up her sleeves and figured out how to manage. She was the strong one, really. How did you meet? Church social back in Missouri. She dropped her hymnal and I picked it up. She thanked me, and I was so tongue-tied I couldn't say anything back. She thought it was hilarious. The memory was bittersweet but no longer agonizing. We courted for a year before I worked up the nerve to propose. Best decision I ever made. Until now? Clara asked softly. He looked at her, this woman who'd come into his life through a desperate advertisement, who'd survived things he could barely imagine, who loved his daughter with a fierceness that took his breath away. Until now, he confirmed. Claire set down her mending and took his hand. I want to tell you about James. The real story. Not just the ending. You don't have to. I do. If we're going to really try at this, you need to understand. She stared into the fire, gathering courage. He wasn't always cruel. When we first married, he could be charming, attentive. I thought I'd found someone who would take care of me. My parents had died the year before, and I was so alone. James seemed like salvation. Her voice went flat. Then he started drinking. At first just socially, then more. And with the drinking came anger. He'd rage about his business failures, his father's disappointment, how nothing was ever good enough. And somehow it became my fault. Caleb squeezed her hand, encouraging her to continue. The first time he hit me, I was so shocked I didn't even fight back. He apologized, cried, swore it would never happen again. But it did. Again and again. I tried to leave twice, once to my aunt's house, once to a women's charity. Both times he found me. Both times he convinced everyone I was hysterical, imagining things. He was so good at being charming in public that no one believed me. The night he died? He'd lost a business deal, thousands of dollars gone because of bad investments. He came home drunk and furious, blaming me for distracting him, for being expensive, for existing. He had a knife from the kitchen, said he was going to teach me a permanent lesson. She was shaking now, but her voice stayed steady. I grabbed the fireplace poker. We fought. He was stronger, but I was desperate. When he finally went down, I kept hitting him. I couldn't stop. Even after he was still, I kept hitting him because I was so tired of being afraid. Clara? I'm not sorry he's dead. That makes me a terrible person, maybe. But I'm not sorry. The only thing I regret is not fighting back sooner, harder. Maybe then I wouldn't have lost so many years to fear. Caleb pulled her fully into his arms, holding her while she shook with the weight of confession. You're not terrible. You're a survivor. And anyone who judges you for doing what it took to stay alive can answer to me. They stayed like that for a long time, the fire burning low, two people who'd both lost so much finding comfort in shared pain and tentative hope. When Clara finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but her expression was lighter. Thank you for listening, for not being horrified. I'm horrified by what was done to you, never by you. Something passed between them then, an understanding that went deeper than words. This was what a real marriage could be, not just legal papers and shared space, but true partnership. Seeing each other's worst moments and choosing to stay anyway. The weeks passed, winter slowly loosening its grip on the prairie. Claire and Caleb fell into a new rhythm, one that felt less like careful coexistence and more like genuine partnership. They talked more, shared more. Let Maggie see them working together, not just practically, but emotionally. The child blossomed under the change, her laughter filling the house more frequently. Her natural brightness no longer dimmed by the tension of adults who kept too much distance. One morning, Caleb woke to find his bed empty. Clara's bed, technically, but they'd started falling asleep together on the sofa, and he'd carried her to his room twice now rather than wake her. She'd protested the first time, worried about propriety and assumptions. The second time, she'd just curled into him and slept through till morning. Progress, he thought. Small steps toward something real. He found her in the kitchen making breakfast, humming one of the songs she sang to Maggie. She'd started smiling more, the hard edges of constant vigilance softening into something that almost looked like contentment. "Good morning," she said, turning to hand him coffee. "Morning." He accepted the cup, then did something that felt both terrifying and necessary. He kissed her. Not the brief pecks they'd exchanged for show, but a real kiss, gentle and asking. When he pulled back, Clara's eyes were wide with surprise and something that might have been pleasure. "What was that for?" "Because I wanted to. Because you're my wife, and I'm tired of pretending that's just a legal formality." He set down the coffee. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But I need you to know, this is real for me now. You're real for me." Clara touched her fingers to her lips, processing. Then slowly, tentatively, she smiled. "It's real for me too. Scary, but real. Scary I can work with." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "As long as we're in it together." From upstairs, Maggie's voice called out that she was awake, and the moment broke. But it had happened, that shift from arrangement to genuine feeling, and both of them felt it. The day before they were due in court, a rider came from town. Not Tom Richardson this time, but the marshal himself. Caleb met him at the gate, every muscle tensed for bad news. "Mr. Harlan, need to speak with you and your wife." They gathered in the kitchen, Marshal Peters accepting coffee and looking uncomfortable in the way lawmen do when they're about to deliver news no one wants to hear. "Had a telegram from Boston. Concerns your wife." He pulled out a paper. Robert Thornton was found dead 3 days ago, shot in an altercation with another man over a gambling debt. The words hung in the air, so unexpected that for a moment no one moved. Then Clara's coffee cup shattered on the floor, her hands shaking too hard to hold it. "Dead?" she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Which means the case against you is effectively dropped. The territorial court received word this morning. Your hearing tomorrow has been canceled." Peters looked between them. "You're free and clear, both of you. No charges, no investigation. It's over." After the marshal left, Caleb and Clara stood in the kitchen amid broken porcelain and spilled coffee, trying to process what had just happened. The threat that had loomed over them for months, the danger that had forced their hasty marriage, the fear that colored every day, gone, just like that. "It's over," Clara said, but it sounded like a question. "It's over," Caleb confirmed. She started to shake, then to cry, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and long suppressed. Caleb held her through it, this woman who'd been so strong for so long, finally allowing herself to break because she could, because she was safe, because the monsters chasing her were finally, truly gone. When the storm passed, Clara pulled back and looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Caleb, you married me to protect me from Robert Thornton and legal trouble. But now there's no threat. No reason we have to stay married. If you want an annulment— Do you want one? He interrupted. She stopped, the question clearly not what she'd expected. No, but I thought you might. You're free now. Free from my problems, from the complications I brought into your life. Clara. He cupped her face in his hands. I didn't marry you because I had to. I married you because I wanted to. Because you made this house feel like a home again. Because my daughter loves you. Because I— He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Because what? Because I love you. There, he'd said it. Ed, the truth he'd been dancing around for weeks, maybe longer. I love you, Clara. Not the way I loved Sarah. That was different, built on different foundations. But I love you for who you are, for your strength and your kindness, and the way you've fought for happiness despite everything trying to take it from you. So no, I don't want an annulment. I want you to stay. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Fresh tears spilled over, but these were different, softer, filled with something other than pain. I love you too. I didn't think I could, after James. Didn't think I had that capacity left. But somehow you and Maggie cracked something open in me, let light back in. She laughed through her tears. I want to stay. I want this to be real in every way. He kissed her then, really kissed her, pouring 3 months of growing feelings into it. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara was smiling. Does this mean— She started, then stopped, uncertain. It means whatever you want it to mean. We go at your pace. No pressure, no demands. Just two people learning how to be married for the right reasons instead of desperate ones. A sound from the doorway made them turn. Maggie stood there, her blonde braid coming loose, her eyes bright with an emotion beyond her years. Does this mean Clara stays forever? The child asked. Really forever? Not just pretend forever? Clara knelt down and opened her arms. Maggie ran into them, and Clara held her close, her voice thick with emotion. Really forever, sweetheart, if that's all right with you. Can I call you Mama? The question was hesitant, hopeful, enormous. Clara looked up at Caleb, seeking permission or reassurance or maybe just strength. He nodded, his own throat too tight for words. If you want to, Clara said gently. Your first mama will always be your first mama. Nothing changes that. But if you want to have two mamas, one who's watching over you from somewhere we can't see, and one who's right here loving you every day, then yes, you can call me Mama. Mama, Maggie tested the word, then said it again with more confidence. Mama. She launched herself at Clara with such force they both tumbled to the floor, laughing and crying and holding each other. Caleb stood watching his family, because that's what they were now, truly a family, and felt the last piece of ice around his heart finally melt. Spring came to the prairie in a rush of green and wildflowers, exactly as Caleb had promised. Clara planted her garden with Maggie's help, and together they learned the names of all the flowers that bloomed across the endless grassland. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The house transformed from a place of bare survival into a real home filled with laughter and life. One evening in late May, Caleb came in from the fields to find Clara sitting on the porch swing he'd built at Maggie's request. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and his wife was watching it with an expression of such peace it stopped him in his tracks. Beautiful, isn't it? Clara said, making room for him on the swing. It is. He sat beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that had become natural, comfortable. Hard to believe this is the same place from 6 months ago. Everything's changed. For the better, I hope. Definitely for the better. He pulled her closer. I was thinking that money from your first marriage. I know you don't want to touch it, but there might be another use for it. Clara tensed slightly. What do you mean? There's a women's shelter being started in Topeka, place for women escaping bad situations. Helps them get on their feet, find work, Start over. I was thinking, if you wanted, you could donate some of that money to help fund it. Turn something that came from pain into something that prevents pain for others. She turned to look at him fully, eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been wonder. You would do that? Let me give away that much money? It's your money, Clara. It was always your choice what to do with it. I just thought, if you wanted to do something meaningful with it, something that honors what you survived, that might be a good way. Tears spilled over, but she was smiling through them. Yes, I want to do that. Take all of it, every penny that came from James, and turn it into something good. Something that helps other women escape before it's too late. They sat in the gathering darkness, making plans, dreaming together. Inside the house, Maggie was getting ready for bed, singing the songs Clara had taught her. The prairie wind was warm now, carrying the scent of growing things instead of the bitter cold of winter. Caleb, Clara said softly, I'm ready. Ready for what? To be your wife. In every way. She met his eyes, nervous but certain. I know we said we'd take our time, and we have, but I don't want to wait anymore. I trust you, I love you, and I want this marriage to be complete. His heart hammered in his chest. Are you sure? There's no rush, Clara. I meant what I said about going at your pace. I'm sure. She took his hand and placed it over her heart, letting him feel how it raced. I'm scared, but I'm sure. Help me not be scared anymore. He stood and pulled her to her feet, then lifted her into his arms the way he had on their wedding night, though that night he'd carried her only to her own door before bidding her good night. This time he carried her to their room, the one they'd been sharing more and more frequently, and closed the door behind them. What happened between them that night was private, sacred, the final step in transforming a marriage of convenience into a marriage of love. Clara trembled at first, old fears rising, but Caleb was patient and gentle, letting her set the pace, showing her through actions what he'd promised in words, that she was safe with him, cherished, that this was about connection and partnership, not control or ownership. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Clara cried again, but this time from relief, from healing, from the overwhelming realization that she'd finally, truly found her way home. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For what? For being patient, for being kind, for choosing me when you could have chosen easy safety instead. Easy safety is overrated. He kissed the top of her head. I'd choose you 1,000 times over. The months that followed were not perfect. Life never is. There were hard days when the ranch work seemed endless, when Maggie got sick and scared them both, when Clara had nightmares that dragged her back to Boston. But they faced it all together, and that made all the difference. Clara's donation to the women's shelter created ripples through the territory, helping dozens of women find their way to safety and new lives. Letters came from grateful survivors, and Clara kept everyone, reading them when the memories grew too dark, reminding herself that survival was possible, that good could come from pain. Maggie thrived, growing taller and brighter, her natural joy no longer dampened by loss and silence. She called Clara Mama without hesitation now, though she still talked about her first mother sometimes, keeping those memories alive in the way Caleb had hoped she would. Sarah would always be part of their family's story, but she was no longer a ghost haunting them, just a beloved memory held with love and gratitude. 1 year to the day after Clara had stepped off that train in Abilene, they had a party. Tom Richardson and his wife came, along with other neighbors who'd come to accept and respect the Harlan family. Reverend Hayes attended, pronouncing himself pleased to see a marriage he'd sanctified clearly thriving. Even Mrs. Henderson from the Mercantile managed to congratulate them, though she couldn't help adding that she'd known from the start it would work out. As the sun set on that anniversary, Caleb and Clara stood together watching their land, their home, their life spread out before them. Maggie played nearby with the barn cats, her laughter carrying on the warm spring breeze. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked. Answering that advertisement, bringing a stranger into your life, all the complications that came with me? Not for 1 second. He turned to face her, this woman who'd come to him broken and desperate, who'd healed and helped heal him in return. You saved us, Clara. Maggie and me both. We were just surviving before you came. Now we're living. We saved each other, she corrected. You gave me safety and trust and showed me what a good man looks like. That's a gift I can never repay. You repay it every day. He pulled her close, breathing in the lavender scent that now meant home to him. Every morning I wake up with you beside me. Every time I hear Maggie call you Mama, every time I see you smile, that's payment enough. From across the yard, Maggie came running, breathless and excited. Mama, Daddy, come see! The calico had her kittens. There's 5 of them. They went together to admire the new life, their daughter between them, all 3 holding hands. And standing there in the barn with straw on their clothes and sunset light slanting through the gaps in the walls, they were everything they'd needed to become. Not perfect, but whole. Not without scars, but healing. Not the family any of them had expected, but the family they'd chosen. That night, after Maggie was asleep and the house was quiet, Clara sat at the kitchen table writing a letter to the women's shelter. Caleb came to read over her shoulder, and she leaned back against him automatically, comfortably, the way partners do. I'm telling them about another donation, she explained, larger this time, and offering to visit, to talk to the women there about survival and hope, and how life can get better even when it seems impossible. That's good. They need to hear from someone who's been where they are. We all need to hear that sometimes. She set down her pen and turned to face him. Caleb, I want to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone. I'm listening. When I got on that train to come here, I didn't really believe I'd find safety or happiness. I thought I was just buying time, running until they caught me, or I ran out of places to hide. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. But you and Maggie, you gave me more than shelter. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a future worth fighting for. We gave each other that, he said, pulling her up and into his arms. That's what love does. It makes the fight worthwhile. They stood together in the lamplight, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. 2 people who'd been broken in different ways, finding wholeness in each other. Outside, the prairie stretched endless under a blanket of stars, and somewhere in that vastness were other people facing their own darkness, fighting their own battles. But here, in this small ranch house in the middle of Kansas, 3 people who'd found each other through desperation had created something remarkable. A family built not on blood or tradition, but on choice and courage, and the profound act of showing up for each other, day after day, no matter what came. Caleb Harlan had ordered a wife for the ranch because he'd needed help. What he'd gotten was so much more. A partner, a friend, a love he'd thought he'd never feel again. Clara had answered that advertisement seeking only escape. What she'd found was a home, a daughter, and a man who proved that not all vows are made to be broken. And Maggie, who'd asked with a child's simple wisdom if Clara could stay forever, had received the answer she'd hoped for, not just in words, but in the life they built together, in the laughter that filled their home, in the certain knowledge that some families are made by choice rather than chance, and those families can be just as strong, just as real, just as forever. The prairie wind sang through the darkness, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. Inside the house, the lamp burned low, and 3 hearts beat in rhythm with the land they'd claimed and the love they'd chosen. The past would always be part of them, Sarah's gentle memory, James's terrible legacy, the scars that never quite fade. But the future was theirs to write, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage after another. And in the morning, they would wake together and begin again, as they always did, as they always would. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because love, real love, is less about grand gestures and more about daily choices. The choice to stay, the choice to trust, the choice to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of what came before. Can she stay forever? Maggie had asked. And the answer, written in every sunrise they shared, every meal they made together, every challenge they faced as one, was yes. Forever, and then some.